Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Dalton Girdley, and welcome back to the second episode of Ear Openers. We've got a banger of an episode today. We're going to be talking about Bernstein's West Side Story, and we'll also be going into Aaron Copland's Quiet City. And joining me on this discussion is none other than Kelly Fallon. Kelly knows pretty much everything about music history, and she can fix contrabass clarinets, which I'm pretty sure only like 6 people can do in the entire world. So I'm thrilled that you're here. Thanks for taking the time and coming out. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to get to talk about especially these cultural related pieces and
Mm-hmm.
how they reflect American life. As you know, this is kind of my area of study that I do in
Yeah.
musicology. So I'm really excited to be here and I can't wait to dig into this.
Yeah, well, we'll just get into it. So we'll start off with West Side Story and just kind of like
Okay.
get a baseline introduction. When was the first time you listened, or watched West Side Story? And do you remember any of your initial reactions to it?
I remember the first time back, I'm from New York, and on Saturday afternoons, the first time I saw this was actually the film adaptation. As a family, we went down on Sunday afternoons when they did the film broadcast, and they played West Side Story, and my father actually is quite into musicals, so he watched a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And I just was like very much in awe of the music because a lot of the ones that my dad enjoyed were Oklahoma, State Fair, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. And so all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, as a saxophonist, I'm hearing these jazz and Latin rhythms, and there's these things I'm getting really excited about hearing for the first time. And I remembered how much I liked it that I actually went out and bought the cassette tape of the this is way back, right? I bought the cassette tape of the recording, and I just kept playing it over and over again. I had a couple of songs that really stood out that I liked, and
Mm-hmm.
oddly enough, one of the ones I do not like from the musical is Night. It's one of my least favorite, kind of parts of the book.
Uh-huh.
It's not my favorite, So it was kind of this really, really interesting work to see too. And it was one of the first times that I had seen a musical where, there was heavy disagreement, disagreement in other musicals. Like I mentioned that I watched with my dad, like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, but it wasn't violent. This was the idea that it was
Mm-hmm.
something violent and dangerous. And especially growing up in New York at this time, I could really relate because we were having a lot of problems in New York, especially drug trafficking and gangs, and we were really hoping that they would get the city cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
So it really kind of resonated with me of one, it's home, it's New York, and two, it was just something we did as a family that we sat down and listened to this music.
Yeah. I just had a similar start where I first watched the film adaptation. That was like my first exposure to it. And, which I'm glad we're talking about this because it's kind of an ear opener to me almost because it was such a much more musically dense work, than anything else I was listening to. I got a lot of good, jazz, listened to a lot of that. I got like a good, I didn't hear, I have like, until I heard West Side Story, I hadn't gotten a lot of Latin American music. And not even that, I mean, I guess isn't, West Side Story is not entirely Latin American music, but it was a good exposure to that and helped me kind of branch out from where I was.
Yeah,
Have
and
you?
I think one of the big like people don't realize is that Bernstein was actually Bernstein was actually a really important Latin dancer. That's what he liked to do for fun.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of he was especially fond of the mambo. And so I think that's like one of the things that definitely resonated
Yeah.
with him was hearing this music and incorporating it into
Mm-hmm.
the work, being so familiar with it.
Have any of your, thoughts and opinions on the piece changed from when you first heard it?
Um, obviously, like when I first heard it, you're just really listening for the music.
Hmm.
You're kind of listening to you're getting caught up in the visual aspect of it. But as I've, learned more about music, a lot of what happens in the music, or, especially with his use of the tritone chord to kind of clue us into, oh, there's a
Yeah.
conflict here. Here's the tritone. And then, but he has the two different tritones. So there's the Jets tritone and there's the Sharks tritone. And a lot of times he'll put those like right side by side. And so
Mhm.
it never gets resolved. So
Yeah.
like when you start understanding that, it kind of puts a spin, and you can like look in today's society what's happening, especially with like the Black Lives Matter movement and other such movements. Um, we can look at it and just say, oh, well, this is still relevant.
Hmm.
What's happening at this point in time when this being written in 57, there were a lot of Puerto Ricans moving into New York City, and they were pretty isolated. And you kind of get that isolation a little bit, especially in the song America. Steen just does an amazing job of writing the lyrics
Hmm.
and everything, and conveying these two different ideas, even between the men and women, of what life in America is going to be about. And so to be able to have something that was written in 57, even though they're not the same racial groups involved, it's just so relevant
Yeah.
even in today's. And I think that's one of the things that really resonates with now that I'm older is how much the music can appeal and is applicable to what's happening in
Hmm.
today's society.
And that's something you don't get like through the first listen through of
Oh,
West Side.
definitely not.
And that's why I think the more you listen to it, the more you grow to appreciate it. Because that's how I've been, just because there's just so much to unpack with it. You can, every time you listen through it, you can pick up on something else because there's just that much going on. But yeah, I think you're right about how
And I mean,
relevant it is. You,
and even if you think of the song Maria, when he's singing that, he's hitting that tritone in there. He knows it's something he can't obtain, that it's
hmm.
something that he wants, but it's just not quite there. And so like there's all this really important ideas in the music, that definitely comes through. And I think he's done a wonderful job of writing the music, and then having the songwriter, excuse me, Sondheim, kind of come in and fill in
Hmm.
the different types of ideas, and they just marry the music so well that it just becomes this really rich story that you can get lost in.
Hmm.
Uh, it's definitely, and the music too it's written in such a way that you can understand the politics of that time. You can understand the isolationism.
Yeah.
These are a group of people in New York who, I didn't realize this. I just came across this in some research a couple months ago, but they had their own radio stations. It wasn't common to have these big. They had these small, like, neighborhood radio stations that would just play the type of music, and they would get out and they would dance. And so there was a lot of pushback against this, oh, outsider. But that's something that's always been, even from the early immigrants
Yeah.
coming in, whether it was the Irish or the Jewish people or whatever. There's always been this large pushback against, this idea. And so it's kind of interesting too to take this cultural um, idea and characterize it, and drop it into the music, and
Hmm.
all of a sudden, across America, everyone, is singing mambo and
Yeah.
all these other songs that we weren't necessarily used to hearing before.
Yeah. So I guess we'll unpack the music a bit more. But what musical styles do you hear in West Side Story? And of course, there's a lot here, but just a few.
Right. Well, and because it's definitely, because it's a musical, it's got to convey emotion.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times, a lot of this music that we're hearing is definitely modernism. You'll hear that more in the
Yeah, I was gonna
classical
say that.
style.
It's very, you
You
can,
have these.
yeah, you can really hear like, a lot of like bitonality almost. I believe that's what
Oh
I
yeah.
hear. It's very modern sounding at times, you know.
Yeah, and especially like, we're talking, but if we take you know, even the idea of the one hand, one heart, a lot of that music, it just kind of lays there, and then you'll hear these different tonalities coming in,
Hmm.
and he's really taking the art music, and the art music this time was just starting to come really make a big comeback because right right probably after the Great Depression through World War II, there's this idea of that the music needs to identify
Yeah, it has to have.
American, what it means to be American.
Hmm.
And the critics are really going after the composers for using bitonality and for using different um, chordal structures and modal structures, and they're under fire. And so they want to kind of limit that. So the fact that we're seeing this come back in the 50s, we're seeing how we're moving forward, and the composer now is
Yeah,
taking back the music and saying, this is what I want it to be. Obviously there's the Latin influence and the use of
yeah,
jazz as well,
yeah.
but definitely that bitonality that's occurring within the
Mm,
work is very important socially. And when we're looking at this of what's happening with the composers, you really have to kind of applaud the composers at this time, saying, we don't care what the critics think, we're going to write
yeah.
how we want to write.
And I think he did a
And
good
we're
job of
almost at that time.
making it the bitonality and all that modern stuff accessible, palatable, because it's just it appeals to such a wide audience, and that's usually not what like that modernistic music does. So I just think that's really impressive how he got that to work, which that's pretty
Yeah, I
crazy.
mean, and to be able to come back around and definitely pick up a lot of the European training and bringing
Hmm.
these European ideas. It wasn't just the Europeans emigrating from Europe. It was, the people in our own country and saying, well, no, this is what we're going to do, which is really nice to see them kind of take a stand.
Yeah. So we'll cycle back to the Latin American influence. So is this the first time Bernstein composed with the Latin American style? Is this like his first big work with
It's
it?
one, I think it's one of his first big works that's accepted. He was very close friends with Aaron Copland.
Hmm.
And one of the things is like that Copland and Bernstein both, they did a lot of promotion of Latin music.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they were very close with Hinastera and some other people from that Latin flavor of music, and they would actually invite them to the Tanglewood Festival. So there could have been something that was written at Tanglewood,
Hmm.
maybe not as well known, maybe a lost work or something, but they were definitely into this style of music.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say this is definitely the first, but I definitely
Hmm.
want to take a stand in saying, well, I think this one is the first commercially
Yeah.
recognized one.
That's what I had. I was like, this is the first time I could really find. Um, but this is, I mean, it's certainly not his first experience with Latin American music. You can hear that. And he talked about it a lot. I believe, and one of the big sources I used to start researching this was one of his talks about Latin American music. So it's pretty
Mhm.
obvious that he has a lot of experience with it. He's been around it. So we'll go into so
Yeah,
what.
because I mean, not only was
You can
Puerto
go ahead.
Rican influence, but he had visited Cuba
Hmm.
and he had visited Mexico. So he was very well versed in the different styles
Yeah.
that were being created. So, I mean, he had this really broad knowledge that he was able to pull back and refine to create this. So I think that was, very interesting, how fluid he was in this style of music.
Yeah.
It's unique, I think.
What are some of the like distinctive traits that you hear in Latin American music that pop out to you at least?
Um, I think to me, the biggest one that stands out in this work is um,
Yeah.
the polyrhythmic music that's coming out for sure. It's got a lot of the Afro-Cuban music influence in it. And of course, he uses a lot of the traditional instruments that we
Hmm.
haven't heard before. He's bringing in the claves and the maracas and different things. But like one of the kind of unknown things I think that people don't take into account is how simplistic the harmonies can be with these strong vocal singers over the top of it. And that definitely comes through in songs like America.
Yeah.
But that one kind of reminds me of On the Town a little bit. It, with his idea of how it progresses through the city and
Yeah.
representation of different art forms and things. But he writes some very beautiful melodies with these really lush harmonies, and then all of a sudden dissonance creeps in, and then he
Yeah.
resolves it back out to these lush harmonies. But I think the prominence of the singer is really what really sets us off. You leave, the theater, or you watch the movie, and I mean, pretty much we could take everybody knows I feel pretty,
Yeah.
or somewhere you can sing these little things. You
Yeah.
can sing,
Very clear
combo, and
melodies.
it,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
I
I
think
think
for
that's what
me,
the strength, one of the strength.
one of the big like things that clue me into really any style, but especially the Latin American style is, yeah, the percussion and just the, the sound of it. Um, Percussion really helps lead your ear, both with like what they're playing and what they're physically playing on, really help lead to where what you're hearing. And yeah, he does use a lot of those stylistic instruments. Yeah. So what
And I think even
numbers
if you think about it, you watch it with the choreography, the
hmm
stepping of the foot and things of
Yeah.
that nature. I think it definitely it helps emphasize of what we know of Latin
Yeah.
dancing as well. So yes, it is a characterization, but it was a good tie-in, I think, for
Yeah.
those Americans to this commercialization of the style.
Yeah. All right, we'll get into a fun little hypothetical here. So let's say that um, West Side Story had a different plot and it drew ideas from a different culture. Do you think it would still be as popular? So like we'll say,
Yeah.
really? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I do. I think it's got this universal appeal.
Yeah.
'Cause it draws from, everyone gives credit to Shakespeare kind of it, but there actually was a story from like 1527, and I can't pronounce it because it's in a foreign language and
Hmm.
I'll just destroy it. But idea was something Shakespeare took
Yeah.
from this original
Okay.
story. And I think it's about love loss, conflict. I think it's got this universal appeal. And I think you could drop it into just about any different racial configuration and make it work. But because love, it's this universal concept of, I love the person I should love. And I think that can just kind of, everyone can identify with that.
Yeah.
It's
I think
yes,
you're
there
right
is
actually
the political.
with like the
Yeah, I think the
universal
political
concepts.
is secondary.
Hmm. Yeah,
Oh
that's
yeah, it's a
I
universal
didn't even consider
concept that
I didn't
I
even
think we
consider
can
that.
all,
Okay, yeah, like
if
the
it's the same idea of My Fair Lady. He loves the
mhm.
gutter snipe that he shouldn't love. And so I think if we go through that this way, it definitely it's a timeless story.
Yeah, I hadn't even considered that universal like, bottom line where that's but yeah, okay. That's how about you might have changed my opinion there. I originally thought like I really think that the Latin American style really helped made it much more accessible. It's a lot more catchy, but yeah, I think you're right. I think like, and I think it's been proven with success of other musicals with different settings, but deep down, like it's about that wanting what you can't have. That yeah, okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm glad we did that. So it's I would say that West Side Story is Bernstein's most popular work. Uh, do you think that another work deserves that spot, or is West Side Story overhyped?
It was interesting. I was talking with Dr. Bro yesterday,
Hmm.
and we were kind of talking, and just because as I was thinking about this, because I like Candide,
Yeah,
that's my favorite. And I had said to Dr. Bro, I said, what do you think? What's his most popular, for you? What
yeah,
is your favorite work? And he pops out, he goes, the operatic Candide. And I said, yeah, right. Like, so
Hmm.
he and I are both on the same page. And he tells me that he actually saw Candide with Bernstein conducting it. And he's standing in the back alley waiting for
Hmm.
Bernstein to come out because he wants his autograph. And he finally comes out the door and said a woman gets all excited and sees him and says, oh, I love West Side Story. And Bernstein looks at her and he goes, why? It's terrible. I hate that word.
Wow.
So, I mean, if the composer, I think for him, it was probably the commercialism that probably turned him off
Yeah.
from it a little bit. It's a good work, but I there's other works of his that I really, really like. And I asked that question to a lot of people and yesterday, and everyone was naming something other than West Side Story. They all would say, well, I like West Side Story, but my favorite is.
Yeah.
And it was just a really wide range of works, from choral work to instrumental to it was just really neat to just see how people reacted to that
Hmm.
question.
Yeah. That's I I honestly think, and maybe I haven't listened to Bernstein, but this is my favorite work by him. Maybe I do need to get more into and listen to like all of his catalog. But I don't know. I think that the consistency of it for me, like it's just it's well written throughout. And that's something to me that I
Oh,
just think that
absolutely.
that's what makes it, his best, just because it's such a long, it's well over an hour long and each song is consistently good. So I think that's what for me
Oh
makes it my
yeah. Yeah. I
favorite.
mean, it's definitely a good, but I think, for some
Yeah.
of us that have listened lived a little longer, listened a little more, we
I
can
think
find
that's
some
I like
more.
that story about Bernstein saying he didn't like it. That's
I thought it
that's
when
cool.
Dr. Bro told me, I was like, "Are you serious?" And he was like,
Yeah.
"Oh yeah, he did not like it at all." Oh,
That's funny.
that's interesting. I
I
didn't know
I
that.
think that happens a lot with a lot of composers where they write something and they don't think it'll be as popular, and that ends up what they're being most known for. Yeah. What do you
Hmm.
think? And we've touched on this, here and there throughout. But what do you think makes West Side Story so popular and appealing to everyone?
Definitely the love story, but I think for a lot of people, especially at that time, being first, second generation Americans, they could understand, being rejected by
Yeah.
society. And I thought of other more modern works, In the Heights and a few others that, kind of deal with this class struggle idea. And and unfortunately in this pandemic, the have nots have really been highlighted in
Hmm.
our society. And so I think people can understand with the idea of, gee, I wish I had that. I wish I could
Yeah.
do that. I wish I had that opportunity. Um, but I also think that the music is just beautifully written. And
Yeah.
we talked a little about those simple harmonies, and it's something we can all kind of sing along to and get lost in,
Yeah.
for over an hour, and
I
just
think
kind of like, oh,
he does a really good job of balancing all of the different styles that he brings in,
mhm,
the Latin American, it keeps things driving. It's a big part of it, but these, snippets of bitonality, Broadway, jazz, it's a very good balance of everything. And you're right with the plot. It's very relatable, you know.
mhm.
How important do you think the movie adaptation of the play was? Do you think it's like one of the main reasons why the play is, mainstream now?
I would probably say yes, and the reason why I would say that, not everybody can pick up and go to New York or go to London or go
Hmm.
some, Chicago, LA, and see these. So a lot of times for people who were unable to travel, they were able to bring these, great works by seeing it, going to the movie theater. And I don't know what was probably $2 to see a movie at that point in
Yeah.
time, versus what, probably with inflation, probably around 20 $25. It's a little bit more affordable. You could take the whole family to see what it would have been for one Broadway ticket. So I think it's huge, and I think it's another way for people to be able to see these musicals. And one of the things that I also think that helped and continues is the number of high school drama clubs and groups
Yeah.
that do it, community theater. Like they can find the instrumentation fairly easily. The
Hmm.
songs are not super difficult to sing. So I think that's one of the things that's kept it popular.
Yeah, that helped, like
It's
making it
something
more
that's
accessible,
formed.
opening it to a wide. I think, yeah, you're right
Yeah.
with the
So
movies. It's just, movies helped made it so much more, accessible to everybody. It helped, widen the amount of people that could watch it. And I think that I'm not 100% sure, but I believe at this time movies were more popular than live theater. I don't know if that's 100% correct, but
oh
that's
yeah,
what I would believe. And certainly now,
yeah. Well,
movies have only gotten more popular, but yeah,
and
I
at
think.
this time too, MGM and all these studios
Hmm.
had these incredible orchestras. And if you listen to the movies, especially from the 40s, the
Yeah.
MGM orchestra, they just blow you away, the level of professionalism. And these groups were so good. A lot of times for the movie musicals, you saw them on stage performing.
Yeah.
Uh, So it was very exciting. You were getting this high quality performance. I think the only thing for me is all the dubbing, because the actors didn't really sing the songs,
Yeah.
and I think for me that's a little bit of a letdown to know that they weren't
Hmm.
singing them. But again, that's just part of the movies. Like
Yeah.
that was well done. With,
Yeah.
all of a
It's
sudden the
amazing
talking
how
picture was available.
little quality was lost between the play and the movie. Because normally, I mean, when you go from, live play to a movie, you would expect, musically it wouldn't be as good just because, the nature of, live music is almost always better. So yeah, I think you're right with how, like, little was lost in translation, so to say. How about the symphonic
Absolutely.
suite? How do you think that played into um West Side Story and keeping it relevant? Or
Again, it's something like they've played that here at ISU,
Mhm.
several groups, and so I mean having that, I think the relevance of it, I remember when it kind of hit the stand when Dr. Kaiser did it, everyone was so excited because there's pieces that
Yeah.
they love to play, from that, like Cool and Mambo and um, Somewhere, and just to hear these really lush lyrical lines. I mean, the students were excited,
Yeah.
which to me, thinking back of, now, we're in 2021, and that it's still relevant, because I think they did it about 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and it was still relevant and people were excited about it.
Hmm.
So that to me, I think it's just so written that people just enjoy it.
Yeah.
It's if it wasn't as well orchestrated, if it hadn't been as, and that was the thing, is like he had very specific ideas in mind of how he wanted this work orchestrated,
Yeah.
and what he didn't want touched and what he didn't want changed. So to me, I think it's definitely helped keep the popularity alive of, being played through city bands and things. I think it's
Hmm.
just become such a American staple
Yeah.
of the theater that, I mean, there's been what, three revivals, so
Yeah. Yeah. I think
and
you're
they've
right
won
with
Tonys each time. So
with Bernstein writing it. I think that helped a lot because, if someone else arranged it, I don't think it would have been as popular, just because he did such a good job of knowing what to put in, what to keep out. And I just think you're really right on that point.
and in the revival in like 2009, some of the songs were actually sung in Spanish.
Oh, yeah.
So they had changed them, to like A Boy Like That. I know that was one of them, sung in Spanish. And I think it really impacted people to actually hear it. Probably, the idea of, especially with the revival, connecting with its heritage. I think
Hmm.
it was a nice tribute back to Bernstein.
Yeah. We'll conclude this little discussion. What's your favorite song or number from West Side Story? Favorites.
America. And
America.
it's because
That's good.
it's because of Yeah, it's because of the lyrics. I think I really enjoy um, the kind of the ideal versus the reality, but
Mm.
it, it's just like a da 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 da
Yeah,
da.
I love that
It's
little
just
lilt
this
to it
really
almost.
cool little.
Yeah, I know you're talking about.
Yeah,
That's a really good
it's
one.
just one of my definite. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of my favorites. Oh, Siri thought so too. So.
I think my favorite would have to be Mambo. I don't know, maybe I'm just basic, but I think I'm
No, that's
probably
my
a bit
second
biased
favorite.
just because I've played it before, and it's just such a fun thing to play, especially you know you spend a lot of time in ensembles and everything, just playing very serious stuff, very stuff you really can't just let your hair down or relax. And Mambo's a nice
Yeah.
break. It's a nice breath of fresh air.
Yeah,
So
I that's my second
mhm.
favorite. So
I like saying who does who doesn't like shouting Mambo? Anyways, we'll shift over to
yeah.
Copeland's Quiet City, and I don't think this piece is well
Mhm.
known as West Side Story. So could you just give a quick synopsis on kind of what the piece is about, just so because I think that the
Well,
history of it's important too.
initially, this piece was part of a works project
Hmm.
by the government, and it was part of the federal Art Act. And so, what they did was during the Great Depression, they would hire different groups. Like they kind of like they built the dams and roadways and
Hmm.
established the Tennessee Valley Authority. But they were to put people who were out of work to work. And so one of the ideals was that they would hire artists to paint murals, basically to help Americans feel good, to
Yeah.
put some joy back into their life. And one of the big ones was they had created a film project called Quiet City in 1939, and it was a collaboration of a group of artists. And the idea of the work was to explore the human condition in a large city. So we have three characters, and basically it's what think about their life when at nighttime. What do they hope
Hmm.
for? What do they think about? What do they dream of? Um, and so the play was an epic failure. The playwright just was
Yeah.
he was not into the work, didn't enjoy the work. It only ran 2 Sundays, so there's only 2 Sunday performances, and it was over with. But I think for Copeland, he really resonated with the main character, David. David was a Jewish
Hmm.
immigrant um, who had dreams and things he wanted to do, but he had family obligations to take care of. But he wanted to be was a great trumpet player. He wanted to be Bix Beiderbecke. And so when the play fails, Copeland takes the work and he
Hmm.
rewrites it into the work Quiet City. And you kind of will hear the despair and the anguish of being alone, along
Yeah.
with the hopes and dreams. And because it's written as incidental music, it's got this more of a storytelling mood
Yeah.
uh, music. And I think that while as the whole, it's kind of it's a downer to think about people stuck by themselves and trapped in their own negative thoughts. But he does a really nice job of in the end of turning the work
Hmm.
around. But it is just such a beautiful work, and I'm really
Yeah.
glad that he went on and took the film score and rewrote it into this piece, because I think that it's probably one of his better pieces
Yeah.
in terms of storytelling. It's not the idea of just like with rodeo and Appalachian Springs and things of that, of kind of depicting something. This one actually tells a story.
Yeah.
So
So, and you kind of already said some of this, but what were some of your like initial reactions when you first heard the piece?
when I first heard the piece, one of the things that struck me was just the beautiful trumpet writing.
Hmm.
It's this very lush, full sound. It's you kind of get lost in it.
Yeah.
There's these dissonances that are occurring, but the music is, it's just how it fits together. You
Mm-hmm.
have moments of, you're like, wow, this is really sad, to, oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
Yes.
this is amazing, this sounds great, this is so hopeful. So I really think, to me and for me, um listening to it was just kind of almost, I don't want to say it was like almost cathartic, but I mean, it was definitely something that made an impression on me
Yeah, it's like
of
it's an experience
basically,
almost. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. And I
yeah,
think
it's not necessarily
it's not like a toe tapper or anything like that, you don't really, but it's a really, you get in your head listening to the piece. And I think you're right about, you know, Copeland does such a good job of writing a solo over like a backdrop of chords. You talked about the trumpet line. I think he just does such a good job of doing that. So I just wanted to chime in
oh,
there and say, yes, you're just so right about that. My initial reactions to what I kind of talked about is just, it's something, you think about when you're listening to, it, especially, and I think that if you didn't know the context behind, like if you didn't know what it was about, it's just such a, you can just really hear the story that's being told in it. It's a very, I don't know, a lot of people can relate to that idea of, leaving their passion behind to follow, financial success and, having doubts about what you chose. It's just a very relatable experience, and he does such a good job of conveying it.
and balancing the have to, I have to go do this,
Mm-hmm.
versus this is my dream, what I want to
Yeah.
do. And he does a really good job, I think, of, if when you're listening to it, to hear that conflict
Mm-hmm.
within the character.
Yeah. Is there any historical, or does the historical context of this piece being released in like the early years of World War II mean anything? Do you think that had?
I think there was a lot of emotions, with the Great
Mm-hmm.
Depression, coming out of that and going in World War II. As a country, we were definitely kind of like, do we have to get involved in this? I
Mm-hmm.
think, we had a lot of the hesitation of sitting back and watching, and just doing our own thing. I think we were so focused on getting out of the Depression and this second New Deal, which
Yeah.
this piece is written during. I think we were just so into just healing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to set back from this. I don't really want to
Yeah.
get involved in this, but I think they were aware, and I think that's one of the things that you almost hear in the music, and you can resonate with the main character, is you can hear this idea of, hesitancy. I don't really want to get involved, but I know I'm going to have to go do this, but I really don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's connection. I think of that was a lot of times the American idea of, you know, can we just be ourselves? Can we just do this? Can we just, and I think we weren't ready necessarily for World War II. I
Yeah.
think we were so hurting, and even the people were starting to go back to work, and I just don't think we were at a point, as a society, to take on one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really comes through in this work.
Yeah.
We can hear even in the ob in the English horn part, you can hear the hesitancy as well. It's something that all three characters are depicted. You have the small string orchestra, you have the trumpet player,
Uh-huh.
and you have the English horn. They all have different melodic ideas, but you can sense this hesitancy in the
Mm-hmm.
music of, oh, what's coming next. And I think that if we take that, I think he did a wonderful job of capturing what the American psyche was at that point in time, and putting it into the music.
Yeah. So we'll move on. And uh, do you think that well, I guess how much did this piece relate to Aaron Copland's struggles? Since he was Jewish. Do you think there's a lot of
Well,
correlation there? Do you think it's just more of a little bit?
no, I think he understood. I mean, we're talking about a gay Jewish
Mm-hmm.
composer, um, who, okay, at this context, gay is not approved, Jewish is not approved.
Yeah.
There was a pretty good job of uh, putting the Jewish person in the role, of the devil, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
of demonizing them. And I think that's an interesting corollary between West Side Story with the the idea of the devil in music and all this. So I think being friends and being Jewish, being aware of being the outsider, um, living in the ghetto type
Yeah.
settings of the major cities, I think he understood it. He understood that there are things you can't do because you're Jewish, and there's things you
Yeah.
can't do because you're gay, and there's things you can't do. And I think, like, for him to go to Europe and receive his training with Boulanger and things, and then coming back to the United States and wanting to write these modernistic pieces, and the critics just going against him, saying,
Yeah.
no, this music has to be accessible right now. This needs to be what the people can handle, what the people can identify with. And it's something very similar that we've seen in Germany at this point in time,
Yeah.
and even in Russia. So it was this idea of accessibility and having to hide who you are, putting your goals and dreams aside to do what you have to do.
Yeah. It
And I
relates
think
back
he
that
definitely looking at all that.
it relates to that idea of,
Yeah, it
you
definitely
know,
comes.
doing what works and what will make you, financially secure, successful, but that's not really what you wanted to do. It's just almost like a fakeness to it. Your heart's not in it. And I think you're right. I don't think
And
this piece is
it's
like a exact replica of, Copeland's life. I don't think that's, it's like a, down to the last detail. But I think that struggle of, doing what I
he
had to do.
understood.
Yeah, I think I mean, this has to be somewhat related to just things he like, stuff going on inside his head. So
And shortly after this work was written too, he lambasted the critics. Um, he wanted to write the modernistic music like that you hear
mhm.
Bernstein doing, in 59. And he wanted to do that. And he wrote this long diatribe, and it was published in the papers about how, who are you to tell us what we should be writing?
Yeah.
We should be able to write what we want to write. It shouldn't have to be, I shouldn't have to write to make the people happy. I should be able to write what I want to write. And that was very controversial. And shortly after World War II, all these things start coming into play, and
Hmm.
he's pulled in and he's looked at, oh, you're a communist, you're this, you're that. And I think, Copeland definitely puts a lot of his own struggles into his works, um, and kind of being able to communicate some of these ideas. And I
Hmm.
think because it's incidental music, he's able to do it
Yeah.
much easier than if he's writing a symphony or something like that.
Hmm. What compositional styles do you hear in this piece? What can you pick out?
I think the main thing for me is the dissonances that occur.
Hmm.
He has these real lush melodic lines with this underlying tension of dissonance,
Yeah.
and the dissonance builds, and it's just the wave, the slowly
Hmm.
let me put some tension to it, and then let me release the tension. And it's almost Beethoven-esque
Ooh,
in
yeah.
that, the Sherman drawn style. So you definitely hear this, like, harkening back to more of the classical,
Yeah.
early romantic
I think you're right about,
music. So I think we can,
dissonance. I think, and it's interesting how he does
yeah,
it because it's not
it's
like, well, you go ahead. I'll think about it a bit more.
Oh no, you go ahead,
All right.
because
Well,
it's easier to talk.
I think that, the way he approaches the dissonance really helps create that hesitancy, that indecisiveness, because it's not like, he just plops down like a, a huge diminished chord, and, it's like that kind of dramatic dissonance. It's much more of like an underlying, it's a much deeper to me. You know, it's you know, it's the dissonance that.
I,
Sorry.
I think also, like, if we look at that dissonance idea and how he builds it and how the stress and the release and the tension, and then all of a sudden he will give us this very strong resolution of almost hopefulness. He really definitely builds the work, and he tries very, very hard to, you know, like, I really want to say that he really is leaning so hard to this romantic idea of, you know, I can create a dissonance and I can relax it and I can, but there's so many works that for me that don't quite do this as successfully as this work does. He has other, you know, other ones that come out, and you know, it's just a really, really interesting idea that he creates within the work, of hearkening back to this earlier style. And I think a lot of that is we're just, it's only, you know, 30 years in the past of the end of the romantic era. So I think it's still very accessible to people.
Yeah.
And they're still using it. The other thing that they did at this point in time in America was to make people literate, was they would create these almost like box sets for education. So you could learn culturally and achieve. And we're coming out of the end of the rise of the white collar worker, you know, the clerk essentially within the businesses. So a lot of times with them, they would get these like little pre-packaged learning kits, and it would talk about music and things to make them knowledgeable, to help them move up in the corporate ladder. So I think it's tagging on to a lot of what the hope was, the fin de sille, to move forward. So
What I'm reminded of, and this is not really compositional style, but it reminds me a lot of The Unanswered Question by Charles Ives. That I think you're right with the dissonance isn't exactly like, you know, super harsh. It's not very dramatic. It's more of a very almost a quiet, you know, just mild tension almost. So yeah, that's what comes to mind
and it
for me a
reminds
lot.
me so much of Fanfare the Common Man, just 2 years later. You know, it's got a lot of that. I mean, because obviously listeners probably aren't as familiar with Quiet City, but it shares a lot of the same ideas, I think, of Fanfare for the Common Man, the stress and the release, and, you know, especially being an instrumental piece.
I think it shares a lot with, and I'll go as far, I'll say this is almost a precursor to Appalachian Spring, so like just, you know, tone and sound wise.
Absolutely.
And I believe that some of the parts from here are taken, or he took some of the parts from Quiet City and put them into Appalachian Spring, if I remember reading that right. But I think this piece is a precursor to it almost. So,
and if you think about how the work opens, you know, that quiet desolation, you know, and then it builds and builds and builds, and then it kind of declines again. And I think there's definitely parallels that happen. There's definitely the soloistic ideas that come through. And by this time when he's writing this, you know, he's written El Salon, he's written Billy the Kid, he's written the Short Symphony. So he's written a lot of other works that were, you know, kind of like storytelling ideas. So I think all this is definitely taking everything he knows and definitely leading up, as you said, the precursor for Appalachian Spring. You know, you can kind of sit there and hear little bits and ideas of, you know, what he's going to put into Lincoln Portrait. And I definitely think that you're absolutely right on the money of how Appalachian Spring is going to kind of fall into and utilize a lot of the techniques he wrote in Quiet City.
So how how popular was Quiet City at its initial kind of release, and do you think it's gotten more or less popular?
Oh, it's definitely gotten more popular.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of those unknown works that people weren't really sure how to take at the
Yeah.
time. I think what's really driven the popularity of it is that solo trumpet line. Um, Definitely having some elements of jazz in there. And I think it's a piece a lot of trumpet players like to play.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of talking to Professor Signer, and we kind of talk about different things we're working on. And she said, well, what's one of the things? I said, well, I'm looking at Quiet City right now, and I'm going to be, doing a podcast with a student. And she's like, Quiet City, oh, I love that. That was her initial
Yeah.
reaction. That killer trumpet part there, and she just went on for a good 50 minutes about how much she loved this work
Mm-hmm.
and how much it just really has struck her and impressed her as one of Copeland's. She was saying it's one of her favorite pieces to play.
Yeah. It
Um,
it's
I think that
interesting.
definitely it's more popular now.
Yeah, and I think it only will get more popular as it,
Oh yeah.
more, because it's, like you said, people enjoy playing it because it's Copeland, and I think people could really relate to it. You know, it's a very
Oh
it's similar to West Side Story. It's a very relatable underlying theme. So,
yeah,
and
and
I
I think like one of the things that people don't realize too is the historic value. I mean, we have a lot of these WPA works out there,
mm-hmm,
but when you mention like WPA works for theater and things, everyone thinks of The Cradle Will Rock, and it kind of dies on a lot of those more well-known works because of the issues that are surrounding it. And Quiet City didn't really have much of an issue. It didn't really have much of a start.
mm-hmm.
I think it was just something that was there, and as people discover the work, I definitely think it's becoming more and more popular. And Dr. Dean had mentioned something, um, the work by Bernstein, that's kind of a take on this one as well. And I really wish it's the quiet something, and I really wish I could remember it right now. But it was definitely something that influenced something that Bernstein had written later on
Yeah,
in his
I think
career.
you're right. I think it's only gonna catch on more.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, that pretty much wraps it up. That's all the questions I had about it. Do you have anything else you like? Anything you want to? Any concluding thoughts? Anything you want to plug? Anything?
Anything I want to plug, music history is awesome.
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
I think a lot of people don't realize like music history at times is not only listening to the music and how the style is written, but it really relates to our cultural past, and it's a
Hmm.
lot more significant than we think. And I think we can find these connections in the music, especially through the score study and just
Yeah.
listening more. And it's definitely fun.
I think,
It's
yeah,
definitely fun. And
yeah. I think you're so right about when you know the context like behind when a piece is written. I think it just changes how the piece, how you hear it. And I think definitely with Quiet City, like if you don't know the context behind it, I just don't think you would like it as much, honestly. Like,
no,
so
no, you kind of hear it and you'd be like, oh, that's a downer. But when
yeah,
you realize
yeah.
that it's oh, it's what people hope and dream. And I think again that relatable aspect of we've all at night had the sleepless night where we lay in bed thinking,
Yeah,
what am I doing?
definitely.
Is this the right decision? Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think it's something. It shouldn't be dread. It should be looked at with fun. I always tell people it's a puzzle, and you're just
Yeah.
putting the puzzle together. And once you put all the puzzle pieces together, that's when
Hmm.
it becomes really exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on and spending time out of your day to talk to me about music history. And
Mhm.
that'll wrap it up for this episode. So we'll see you next time.